close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the cold. Not the kind that makes you shiver on your way to work. Not the kind that sends you reaching for an extra blanket. This cold is different. This cold has teeth. You are standing on the deck of a medieval pirate ship in the middle of the night. The boards beneath your feet are slick with frost. The sea around you is black as ink. The wind cuts through your woolen coat like it is made of paper. Your breath freezes before it even leaves your lips. Your fingers are already numb, and you have only been here for 5 minutes. How did they do it? How did pirates close their eyes and sleep in this frozen hell without freezing to death? Tonight you're going to find out. But before we step into that frozen world, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel if you love history that goes a little too deep. And if you're listening from somewhere cold right now, tell me in the comments. I want to know where you are and what time it is. Now, take a breath and let us step into the story. The cold does not just bite. It claws. It burrows into the wool of your coat and finds the gaps between the threads. It slips through the cracks in the leather of your boots and wraps around your toes like a slow, tightening fist. You're standing on that deck, and you can feel it now. That deep ache that starts in your fingers and travels up your arms. That numbness that creeps across your cheeks and turns your ears to ice. You are freezing, and you have not even been here an hour. How'd they do it for months? How do they close their eyes and rest in this frozen wasteland without simply ceasing to exist? The answer begins with what they wore. But it is not what you think. You might imagine thick, heavy coats and fur-lined hoods. You might imagine warm wool blankets wrapped tight around their bodies. But the truth is far stranger, far more desperate, far more human. A pirate of the 15th century was not dressed for comfort. He was dressed for survival. And survival meant layers. But not the layers you know. Not the soft, breathable fabrics you pull on a winter morning. These layers were rough and scratchy and stiff with salt. They were made of wool and leather and whatever could be stolen or traded. Wool was the foundation. Thick, heavy wool against the skin. It was coarse and it itched and it soaked up sweat and salt and turned into a second skin that never quite dried. But it held heat better than anything else they had. And that was enough. Above the wool came linen. Thin and brittle, but crucial. It was a barrier. A layer between the wool and the leather that came next. It trapped air, and air was warmth. They did not know the science of it. They just knew that when they wore both together, they shivered a little less. Above the linen came the heavy coat, often made of canvas or stiff leather, sometimes stolen from soldiers, sometimes patched together from old sails. It was rough and heavy, and it smelled like smoke and salt and everything else on that ship. But it stopped the wind. And stopping the wind was half the battle. But here is the detail that changes everything. The detail that makes you realize how desperate they really were. They rubbed themselves with whale oil. Before they slept. Before they stood watch. Before they did anything that required them to be still for more than a few moments. They would take thick, greasy whale oil and smear it across their hands and faces and necks and any exposed skin. It smelled awful. Thick and fishy and rancid, but it worked like a primitive thermal layer. It trapped heat against the skin. It kept moisture from freezing on the surface. It created a thin barrier between their fragile flesh and the killing cold. Imagine the feel of it now. That slick, greasy residue on your fingers, mixed with salt and grime and the sweat of a body that had not been properly washed in weeks. It would catch what little warmth your body could produce and hold it there. A small, fragile pocket of heat against the endless assault of the wind. It is not comfortable. It is not glamorous. But it is survival. And then there were the superstitions. The strange habits that bordered on ritual. Some pirates believed that the cold carried spirits. That the frost on the ropes was the breath of drowned men. They would tie scarves around their throats, not just for warmth but for protection. They would whisper charms into their clothing before putting it on. They would rub their hands with more oil than they needed because the act of rubbing itself kept the blood moving, kept the fingers from stiffening, kept death at bay for one more night. They did not think of themselves as survivors. They did not think of themselves as heroes. They just knew that if they stopped moving, they would die. And so they moved. They layered their clothes, and they rubbed their skin with oil, and they pulled their scarves tight, and they told themselves that morning was coming. Morning was always coming. And when morning came, they would still be here. You can almost feel it now. The rough wool against your chest, the heavy leather stiff on your shoulders, the slick grease on your face that catches the wind and turns it into something almost bearable. You can almost smell it, the salt and the smoke and the animal fat that clings to your skin. It is not a pleasant thought, but neither is freezing to death. And so they did it, night after night, week after week. They wrapped themselves in whatever they could find, and they rubbed themselves with whatever they could steal, and they told themselves that this was normal, that this was just what life was like, that the cold was a companion, not an enemy. They told themselves that if they just kept moving, they would survive. The clothes they wore were more than protection. They were armor against nature and against despair. Each layer told a story of desperation and ingenuity. A stolen coat here, a patched scarf there, a scrap of leather salvaged from torn sail. And over all of it, that thick, greasy whale oil that smelled like death but promised life. It was not beautiful. It was not romantic. But it was real. And that reality kept them breathing through another frozen night. And as you stand there on that deck, feeling the cold creep into your bones, you understand now that survival is not a single act. It is 1,000 small decisions made in the dark. 1,000 small rituals repeated until they become instinct, until they become the only thing keeping you alive. Now, as the wind shifts and the frost thickens on the ropes, you find yourself thinking about what comes next. Because clothing and oil are only the beginning. There is more to this story, more to how they survived. Because when the cold becomes unbearable and the layers are not enough and the oil begins to wear thin, they have to find another way. A warmer way. A more desperate way, and that way begins when they leave the deck and descend into the belly of the ship. You leave the deck behind and descend into the belly of the ship. The ladder is cold beneath your hands, each rung slick with condensation that has frozen and thawed and frozen again. You climb down slowly because one slip could send you crashing into the darkness below. And down here, the darkness is different. It is thicker, heavier. It presses against your eyes like a weight. The air changes as you descend. It becomes warmer, but not in a pleasant way. It becomes thick with the breath of too many men in too small a space. It becomes heavy with the smell of salt and sweat and wool that has not been dry in weeks. It becomes the smell of survival. And then you see them, the hammocks, row after row of them strung from beam to beam like the webs of some enormous creature. They sway gently with the motion of the ship. Each one holding a shape wrapped in rough fabric. Each one holding a man who has somehow found rest in this frozen hell. You stop and stare because it is not what you expected. You imagine pirates sprawled across the deck or curled in corners. You imagine them sleeping in piles like animals. But this is different. This is organized, almost intentional. The hammock was a revolution. You might not think of it that way, but it was. Before the hammock, sailors slept on the deck. They lay on cold, wet wood and prayed the ship would not roll too hard. And when it did, they were thrown against walls and barrels and each other. They woke bruised and bleeding and more exhausted than when they had closed their eyes. The hammock changed all of that. Suspended by ropes, it moved with the ship. It cradled the body instead of fighting against it. When the ship rolled, the hammock rolled with it. When the ship pitched, the hammock pitched with it. A man in a hammock could sleep without being thrown across the deck. He could rest without fearing for his life. It was a small thing, a simple thing, but it was the difference between sleep and waking exhaustion. You step closer to one of the hammocks and touch the fabric. It is rough and stiff with salt. The fibers are coarse against your fingers. It feels like touching sandpaper. Like touching something that has been worn thin by years of use and neglect. This is not a soft bed. This is not a place of comfort. This is a place of necessity. The hammocks were made of canvas. Heavy, rough canvas that had been used for sails or tents or anything else that could be repurposed. They were not washed. They were not cleaned. They were just used until they fell apart, and then they were patched and used again. Some pirates were luckier than others. Some lined their hammocks with stolen sailcloth or scraps of wool. Some managed to find animal fur and used it as a blanket. But most just wrapped themselves in whatever they had and prayed for dawn. They slept in their clothes because undressing meant death. They slept with their boots on because the cold would find their feet in an instant. They slept with their weapons close because on a ship full of thieves and killers, trust was a luxury they could not afford. Imagine the clinking of metal as they turned over, the dull thud of a pistol sliding against the planks, the soft rasp of a knife being drawn and sheathed in the darkness. They slept ready, always ready, because the line between sleep and death was thin and they knew it. They had seen it. They had lived it. And then there was the closeness. The hammocks hung so close together that they touched when the ship rolled. You could reach out and brush your hand across 3 men without moving. This was not by accident. This was by design. The body produces heat. A sleeping body produces warmth that can be shared. And in the frozen darkness of a medieval ship, that warmth was precious. They slept near each other because near meant alive. They slept in clusters because clusters meant survival. It was not intimacy. It was not friendship. It was need. You watch one man shift in his sleep. His hammock sways gently. His hand hangs loose toward the floor. His fingers twitch as if still gripping a rope or a sword. Even in rest, he cannot let go of his work. The sea does not allow that kind of surrender. Another man murmurs something unintelligible. A name perhaps. A prayer. A curse. His voice is soft and rough, and it fades into the creak of the ship. The sounds blend together. The sway of the hammocks. The rhythm of breathing. The occasional groan of wood. It becomes a kind of music. A lullaby built from survival. Some historians believe that pirates slept in shifts. That half the men were awake while the rest slept. That there was always someone watching. Always someone alert. But you look around this cramped space and you see something different. You see men who have collapsed from exhaustion, who have fallen asleep wherever they could find a space, who have given themselves to the darkness because they had no other choice. The sea is relentless, and so are they. There is a detail that stays with you, a small fact that changes how you see these men. Sailors learned early that sleeping on the deck was dangerous. But they also learned that sleeping in hammocks changed something else. It gave them a sense of safety, a fragile illusion of security. And that illusion was worth more than gold. When you are cold and exhausted and afraid, a small comfort can feel like salvation. And the hammock was that comfort. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The sway of the hammocks, the crackle of lantern light, the occasional drip of seawater from above. It all blurs together into a rhythm that feels eternal. This is how they survive the cold. Not by conquering it, not by fighting it, but by swaying with it, by accepting it as part of their strange, floating world. The hammocks, each one a fragile cocoon, hold lives suspended between danger and dreams. Outside, the sea is black and endless. But here in this narrow wooden belly, men drift half asleep, trusting that the ropes will hold and the ship will keep floating until morning. You open your eyes again and watch the shadows move. For a moment, you forget the cold, the danger, the history. You just see motion and rest, life and sleep, all swaying gently together under the weight of the sea. And as you stand there surrounded by sleeping men, you realize that they have found something precious, something the cold cannot take from them. They have found a way to rest, a way to dream, a way to survive. You pull yourself back toward the ladder because the air down here is thick and you need to breathe. But before you climb, you take one last look. The hammocks sway gently. The men breathe softly. The ship moves beneath them like a cradle. And you understand now that survival is not just about warmth. It is not just about layers and oil and fire. It is also about finding a way to rest, a way to let go even when letting go feels impossible. The pirates have learned that lesson. And now, as you climb back toward the deck, you carry that lesson with you. Because there is still more to discover, more to understand. And the next chapter of this story is waiting just below the surface. You climb back onto the deck, but the cold drives you below again before you can even catch your breath. The wind has picked up. It winds through the rigging like something alive and hungry. You pull your collar tighter, but it does nothing. The cold has found its way into your bones, and it will not let go. You need warmth, real warmth, not the illusion of it, not the memory of it, You need heat, and you need it now. So you move deeper into the ship, past the hammocks, past the sleeping men, past the dim glow of the lanterns that barely hold back the darkness. You follow the smell of smoke and ash toward the galley, the small space where pirates cooked and argued, and sometimes found a few precious moments of heat. The galley is cramped, barely large enough for a few men to stand shoulder to shoulder. A small hearth sits against the wall built from stones and reinforced with iron plates. A few embers glow faintly at its heart, but there is no open flame. The pirates knew better than to risk that. One spark could turn the entire ship into an inferno. One ember carried by the draft could ignite the tar-soaked ropes or the salt-encrusted wood. Fire on a wooden ship was every sailor's nightmare. It was death dressed in orange and gold. So they chose the cold. They chose to shiver rather than burn. But they did not give up entirely. They learned to coax heat from the smallest sources. They heated stones. Simple stones gathered from the shore or pried from the ballast. They would place them in the heart of the fire until they glowed a dull red. Then they would wrap them in cloth and carry them to their hammocks. The stones held heat for hours, just enough to thaw stiff fingers, just enough to take the edge off the endless cold. You can almost feel it now, the weight of that stone against your chest, the warmth seeping through the rough fabric, the small pocket of heat that feels like salvation. It would not last. It never lasted, but for a few hours it was enough. And when you're freezing enough is everything. They heated sand too. They would fill iron pots with sand and seal them tight. Then they would place the pots in the embers and let the sand absorb the heat. Sand held warmth longer than stone. It was more forgiving, more patient. They would carry these pots below deck and place them near the hammocks. The heat would radiate slowly, gently, like a breath from a dying fire. Some crews even used heated cannonballs. They would take a spent cannonball from the galley fire and roll it across the deck in a bucket of sand. Then they would place it in a metal box to radiate heat. The risk was immense. A single mistake could send that glowing ball rolling across the wooden planks and into disaster. But the reward was a few hours of bearable cold, a few hours of almost warmth. You stand near the hearth now, watching the men tend their fragile fire. Their hands are rough and cracked, their faces pale and hollow. They move slowly, as if every motion cost them something precious. One man stirs the ashes with a stick. Another feeds the embers a scrap of wood. The flames barely catch, but they are enough. They are enough to remind them that warmth exists, that they're still alive, still human. There is something intimate about this act, something almost sacred, the way they guard the fire, the way they protect it from drafts, the way they pass the heated stones from hand to hand like a precious gift. It is not just survival. It is ritual. It is the small defiance of men who refuse to surrender to the cold. They are not conquerors. They are not heroes. They are just men who have learned to find warmth in the smallest places. And that is enough. You watch as one man unwraps a heated stone and presses it against his chest. He closes his eyes and his face relaxes. For a moment, he is somewhere else. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. He is not a pirate on a frozen ship. He is a man who has found a moment of peace. And then the moment passes, and he wraps the stone again and hands it to the man beside him. They share the warmth because sharing is the only way to survive. That is the unspoken rule of the galley. The heat belongs to no one. It belongs to everyone. And everyone is responsible for keeping it alive. A curious detail from old ship logs describes this same ritual. Men heating stones. Men carrying them below deck. Men guarding their small embers as if they were treasure. Some crews kept a covered bowl filled with sand and ash and a single glowing coal. They called it the heart of the ship. If the coal went out, they believed bad luck would follow. Bad luck and death. So someone always stayed awake. Someone always watched. Someone always tended the heart. You can almost see it now. The bowl glowing in the darkness. A single red ember pulsing like a heartbeat. The men gathered around it in silence. Their faces lit by its weak light. Their hands reaching out, not quite touching but close. Close enough to feel the warmth. It is a fragile thing. This heat, this small defiance against the cold. It could be extinguished by a draft, smothered by a careless hand. lost in a moment of inattention. And yet they protect it. They nurture it. They give it their attention and their care because it is all they have. It is the difference between sleep and shivering, between life and death. And as you stand there in the dim light of the galley, you feel the cold press against your back. It is patient. It is always patient. It will wait for you to let your guard down. It will wait for the fire to die. But you do not let it. You lean closer to the hearth. You let the heat wash over your face. You let yourself feel warm, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it is like. And then you reach for the stone. You wrap it in cloth. You hold it against your chest. And you know that this is how they survived. Not through heroism, not through courage, but through the small, stubborn refusal to give up. Through the heat they carried in their hands and hearts, and the fragile fire they guarded against the darkness. Now, as the galley settles into its quiet rhythm, and the men begin to stir with the warmth, you feel your own body relax. The cold is not gone. It will never go. But for now it is distant. It is something outside the circle of heat. And you let yourself believe that you can carry this warmth with you, that you can hold on to it as you move deeper into the ship and the story continues to unfold. There is still so much to understand, so much to discover. And the warmth you have found is just the beginning. The heat from the stones begins to fade, and the cold seeps back into the galley like a patient predator. The men stir and stretch and pull their coats tighter. The embers glow low, and the darkness gathers at the edges of the room. You feel it too, that slow creeping chill that reminds you that warmth is a visitor, not a resident. And so they reach for something else, something that does not burn but still warms, something that blurs the edges of the cold and makes the darkness feel less sharp. They reach for the rum. The bottle appears from somewhere. A dark glass flask passed from hand to hand like a sacrament. The man holding it takes a long swallow, and his face relaxes. The tension in his shoulders eases. He passes it to the next man, who does the same. The smell fills the air, sweet and sharp and earthy. Molasses and smoke, sugar and salt. It is the smell of comfort. The smell of forgetting. You watch as the bottle moves through the room. Each man takes his share. No one takes too much, but no one takes too little either. They know what they need, and they know when to stop. This is not about drunkenness. It is about survival. The rum burns as it goes down. It cuts through the cold that has settled in their throats. It spreads through their chests like a small fire. Not a real fire. Not the kind that warms the skin, but the kind that warms the spirit. And on a frozen ship, the spirit is just as important as the body. You can almost taste it now. That sharp sweetness on your tongue. The way it makes your eyes water and your breath catch. The warmth that spreads through your stomach and lingers there. It is not the heat of a hearth. It is not the heat of a heated stone. But it is something, and something is better than nothing. There is a strange intimacy to this act. The passing of the bottle, the shared swallow, the small nod of thanks, is a ritual that binds them together, a reminder that they are in this together, that the cold is their common enemy and the rum is their common defense. You watch their faces as they drink, the way their eyes soften, the way their mouths relax, the way they lean a little closer to each other. It is not about escape. It is about connection, and connection is warmth. Some pirates mix their rum with seawater. They called it grog, a word that would later become part of naval tradition. The salt made it harsher. It burned more going down, but it stretched the rum further. It made the warmth last longer. It turned a precious commodity into a survival tool. You can imagine it now, that briny tang on your tongue, the way it makes you grimace and then smile, the way it warms you from the inside out, even as the cold presses against your skin. It is not a pleasant drink, but is an honest one. It tells you exactly what it is, and what it is survival. The men begin to talk as the rum loosens their tongues. They speak of raids and gold and women they have left behind. They speak of ports they have visited and ports they will never see again. Their voices are rough and low. They laugh at jokes you do not understand. They share stories that might be true or might be lies. It does not matter. What matters is the sound of human voices in the darkness. The sound of men who are still alive, still together, still fighting. One man tells a story about a raid on a merchant ship. He describes the way the sailors begged and the way the pirates laughed. He describes the gold and the silk and the spices they found in the hold. The others listen and nod and drink. Another man tells a story about a storm that nearly sank them. He describes the waves and the wind and the way the ship groaned like a dying animal. The others listen and nod and drink. The stories blur together. Fact and fiction, memory and dream. It is all the same in the darkness. It is all part of the rhythm of the night. The rum has a way of making time feel different. It stretches moments into hours. It turns a single swallow into a meditation. You watch as the bottle passes from hand to hand, and you realize that this is their way of coping, their way of surviving the endless cold and the endless dark. They drink because drinking makes the cold bearable. They drink because drinking makes the darkness less frightening. They drink because drinking reminds them that they are still human. But the rum is not without its dangers. It dulls their reflexes. It softens their edges. It makes them careless. And carelessness on a pirate ship is a form of death. There are stories of men who drank too much and fell overboard. Men who drank too much and were killed in their sleep. Men who drank too much and never woke up. The rum warms them, but it also weakens them. It is a bargain, a trade, a little warmth for a little risk. And on a frozen ship, that bargain is worth making. You think about this as you take your own swallow. The burn spreads through your throat. The warmth settles in your stomach. The cold feels distant now, still there but softer, more patient. You pass the bottle to the man beside you, and he takes it with a nod. His eyes meet yours for a moment, and there is something in them. Not gratitude exactly, not friendship, something else. Recognition, acknowledgement, the understanding that you are both here, both cold, both surviving. And that is enough. The rum continues to flow. The stories continue to weave through the air like smoke. The night stretches on, and the cold waits outside. Patient, always patient. But inside the galley there is warmth. Imperfect warmth. Dangerous warmth. But warmth nonetheless. And you begin to understand that this is how they survived. Not through heroism, not through courage, but through the simple act of sharing. Sharing the bottle, sharing the stories, sharing the small, fragile moments of comfort that make the darkness bearable. As the bottle empties and the men begin to settle into their hammocks, you feel the warmth lingering in your chest. It is fading. It always fades. But for now it is enough. And as you close your eyes and let the sway of the ship carry you towards sleep, you realize that there's another source of comfort on this ship. Something small and soft and purring that reminds them that they are not alone. Something that will greet them in the darkness and curl up beside them and share its warmth. The bottle is empty, but the comfort is not over. Not yet. You are still tasting the rum on your tongue as the warmth fades from your chest and the cold begins to creep back in. The galley grows quiet and the men retreat one by one into the darkness of the hold. You follow them, not because you want to, not because you are ready, but because the cold on deck is worse and the hammocks at least offer a fragile illusion of safety. You move through the narrow passage and your hand brushes against something soft and warm. Something that is not wood or rope or canvas. You stop and look down, and there it is. A small creature. A cat. Its fur is mottled gray, and it moves with a quiet confidence that seems out of place on a ship full of exhausted, desperate men. It looks up at you with eyes that glow faintly in the dim light. Then it turns and pads silently into the hold, as if inviting you to follow. You do. You follow the cat through the maze of hammocks and barrels and coiled ropes. It moves with purpose as if it owns this place. And in a way it does. The cat is more than a pet, more than a companion. It is a necessity, a protector, a piece of home in a world that offers nothing but salt and cold and fear. You watch as it weaves between the sleeping men brushing against their faces and their hands. Some reach out to stroke it, even in their sleep. Others smile, faintly, and murmur soft words. The cat seems to know them all. It knows their names. It knows their habits. It knows which men will share their food, and which men will share their warmth. You find a corner and sit down with your back against the barrel. The cat approaches you slowly. It studies you with those bright, knowing eyes. Then it curls up beside you, pressing its small, warm body against your leg. The warmth is faint, but it is there, a small pocket of comfort in the endless cold. You reach down and stroke its fur. It is rough and matted, and it smells of salt and smoke. But it is alive, and that is enough. That is everything. The pirates had many reasons for keeping cats on their ships. The official reason was simple. Rats. The ships were infested with them. They chewed through ropes in food stores and spread disease. They could sink a ship as surely as a storm. The cats hunted them. They kept the population in check. They protected the supplies and the rigging and the precious cargo. But that was not the only reason. That was not even the most important reason. The most important reason was something else. Something harder to measure. Something that did not appear in the official records. The cats lifted spirits. They gave the men something to care for. Something to talk about that was not the cold or the hunger or the fear. They reminded the men that there was still tenderness in the world. Still softness. Still something worth protecting. In a world of violence and desperation, the cats were a reminder of what they were fighting for. Not gold, not glory, but the small, simple comforts that made life worth living. You think about this as the cat purrs beside you. Its small body vibrates with warmth. Its eyes close and it relaxes into you. You feel the tension in your own body begin to ease. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing slows. The cold does not feel as sharp as it did before. The darkness does not feel as heavy. The cat has done something that no fire could do. It has made you feel safe. Not safe from the cold, not safe from the sea, but safe from the loneliness, the isolation, the feeling of being utterly alone in a world that does not care. There's a story you remember, a story from an old ship log. It describes a crew that was trapped in the ice for months. The cold was relentless. The food was running out. The men were dying one by one. But through it all, there was a cat, a small gray cat that stayed with them, that curled up with them at night, that purred and rubbed against their legs and reminded them that they were still human. When the ship finally broke free and the men made it to shore, they carried the cat with them. They treated it like a hero, like a survivor, because in a way it had done what no man could do. It had kept hope alive. You look down at the cat beside you, and you understand that story now. You understand why these hardened, violent men would risk their lives for a small creature. Why they would share their food and their warmth and their limited comfort. The cat is not a pet. It is a symbol of everything they have lost and everything they still hope to find. It is a reminder that there is more to life than survival, that there is still warmth and softness and tenderness in the world. The cat stretches and yawns. It stands up and shakes itself and then walks away. It disappears into the shadows, leaving you with the memory of its warmth. You feel the cold press in again. The loneliness returns, but it is not as sharp as before. The cat has left something behind, a small ember of hope, a small reminder that you are not alone. You close your eyes and let the sway of the ship carry you towards sleep. But even as you drift, you can still feel the warmth of that small body against your leg, the soft rhythm of its purring, the simple gift of its presence. And you realize that the pirates were not just surviving. They were living. They were finding comfort in the smallest places. They were holding on to each other and holding on to their small creatures and holding on to the fragile hope that morning would come. The cat has come and gone, and you are still here, still breathing, still alive. And now, as the ship rocks gently and the darkness settles around you like a blanket, you find yourself thinking about what comes next. Because the warmth of the cat is not the only warmth these men share. There's more, something deeper, something that binds them together in a way that fire and rum and small creatures cannot. Something that begins when they stop trying to survive alone and start surviving together. The cat has left you now, and the warmth it carried with it fades slowly like the memory of a dream. You are alone again in the darkness of the hold. The hammocks sway gently around you, and the men breathe in their uneasy sleep. But you're not really alone. Not here. Not on the ship. The men who sleep around you are strangers, and they are family. They are enemies, and they are brothers. And in the cold, they become something else. They become warmth. You watch as two men shift in their hammocks. They are not together, but they are close. Close enough to touch. Close enough to share. One of them reaches out in his sleep, and his hand brushes the other's arm. The touch is brief, but it is enough. Enough to remind them that they are not alone. Enough to share a small piece of heat. This is not intimacy. Not in the way you might imagine. It is something older. Something more primal. It is survival wearing the mask of closeness. You have seen this before. In the galley. In the hammocks. On the deck. The way they press together. The way they lean into each other. The way they share their warmth like it is the most natural thing in the world. And in a way it is. The human body is a furnace. It produces heat. It radiates warmth. And when that warmth is shared, it becomes something more. A small bubble of comfort in the endless cold. You think about the practice you have heard of. Back sleeping. Two men lying facing opposite directions. Their backs pressed together, sharing heat through the night. It is not romantic. It is not intimate. It is practical. Two bodies create more warmth than one. Two hearts beating close together create a small pocket of heat that can mean the difference between sleep and shivering, between life and death. You watch as a group of men cluster near the mast. They are wrapped together in a single tattered cloak. Their shoulders touch. Their heads lean together. They breathe in rhythm as if they have done this 1,000 times. And they have. They have done this through storms and calm, through fear and exhaustion, through everything the sea has thrown at them. They have learned that survival is not a solitary act. It is a shared one. There is something almost beautiful about it. The way they fit together. The way they find comfort in each other. The way they create warmth from nothing but their own bodies. It is not the warmth of fire. It is not the warmth of rum. It is the warmth of connection. And in the frozen darkness of a medieval ship, that connection is everything. You move closer to one of the clusters, and you see their faces in the dim light. They are not young, not old. They are worn. Their skin is rough, and their eyes are tired. But there is something in their faces that surprises you. Peace. Not the peace of safety. Not the peace of comfort. But the peace of acceptance. They have accepted that this is their life. That the cold is their companion. That the sea is their home. And in that acceptance, they have found a kind of solace. One of them opens his eyes and looks at you. He does not speak. He does not need to. He just nods. A small gesture. A brief acknowledgement. Then he closes his eyes again and leans back into the warmth of his companions. You feel something shift inside you. A recognition. An understanding. You're not just watching them. You are becoming part of them. Part of this strange, floating family that survives by holding onto each other. You find a space near the cluster and you sit down. You lean back against a barrel and you feel the warmth of the men beside you. It is not a fire. It is not a heated stone. It is something else. Something more human. Something more fragile. And yet it is enough. It is enough to take the edge off the cold. It is enough to make the darkness feel less heavy. It is enough to remind you that you are still alive. The night stretches on and the men sleep. They dream of warm places and soft beds and faces they have not seen in years. They dream of gold and freedom and the taste of fresh water. But even in their dreams, they reach for each other. Their hands find each other in the darkness. Their bodies press together for warmth. It is instinct. It is habit. It is survival wearing the mask of closeness. You close your eyes and you let yourself feel it. The warmth of the bodies around you. The rhythm of their breathing. The slow, steady beat of their hearts. It is not a fire. It is not a heated stone. It is something more precious. It is the warmth of connection. The warmth of being together. The warmth of knowing that you are not alone. As the hours pass and the night deepens, you feel yourself relaxing. The tension in your shoulders eases. The cold does not bite as sharply as it did before. You are surrounded by warmth. Imperfect warmth. Fragile warmth. But warmth nonetheless. And you begin to understand that this is how they survived. Not through heroism. Not through courage. But through the simple act of holding onto each other. You open your eyes and look around the hold. The hammocks sway gently. The men breathe softly. The ship moves beneath them like a cradle. And you see it now. The truth that has been hiding in plain sight. The warmth they found was not in the clothes or the oil or the fire or the rum. It was in each other. It was in the small acts of kindness and the shared moments of comfort. It was in the way they held on to each other through the long, cold nights. The night does not last forever, And now, as the first pale light of dawn seeps through the cracks in the planks, you feel the warmth begin to fade. The men stir and stretch and pull themselves from their hammocks. The cold returns with the morning, but does not feel as sharp as it did before, because you have carried something with you. The warmth of connection, the warmth of being together, the warmth of knowing that you are not alone. You stand and stretch and look out at the sea. It is still cold, still endless, still dark, but does not feel as threatening as it did before, because you know that somewhere on this ship there is warmth, there is connection, there is the small, stubborn refusal to give up, and that refusal is the warmest thing of all.